My name is Steven, and you're listening to the Dungeon Speak podcast.
It's night. The tip of a large circle can be seen as the threshold Ithirgard has breached the northern dawn. Winter will set in soon. Among the Green Clan, a village composed mostly of Emerald and Green Dragonborn, it may not be unusual to see a couple red, yellow, and even the occasional albino. What is unusual, though, is the single blue Dragonborn. Scales not as bright or as lustrous as his neighbors, he is alone in more ways than one. Lit only by the embers of the smith's forge where he resides, he finishes repairing the farmer's scythe, puts down his master's hammer, picks up his journal, and he writes. Today, it has been 5 cycles of the Thirgard since I chose my exile. I am a raven among crows. One would consider themselves a master at this point, but my potential was cut short, like a sapling cut down to make way for the harbor of a rich man's ship in a landlocked country. It has been 5 cycles since the Red Clan presented the Clan of Gold with a mechanical box that screamed a cry of Mjolnir with the breath of Muspelheim and usurped my master and I from our rightful place within the Celestial King's service. It has been 5 cycles since my master was executed for speaking against the Celestial King, who would see his people hungry and displaced, to make way for some machine that could produce metal foil in bulk instead of a fine sword that even an apprentice smith could forge. The locals have begun to warm up to the likes of me. I may be able to take an apprentice soon. In this world of rejection and betrayal, the stars are the one thing I can rely on. I'm going to take a walk. Until next time, Karyst, former High Smith to the Celestial King.
An adolescent purple dragonborn, flanked by 2 large red dragonborn, walk up to the entrance of an old village large enough to be classified as its own town at this point. So this is the Green Clan, he thinks to himself. According to the reports and his mother's story, this is the place his father's apprentice allegedly fled to, after attempting to stop the beginning of a decade-long takeover that eventually overthrew the Celestial King from the throne where the Red King now sits. He was used to the angry looks from the older population as he walked through. Revolutions tend to do that. After several failed attempts to ask for directions, a juvenile green lady was nice enough to point him in the direction of the smithy. He walked in and saw an albino whose scales were grayed from the forge smoke. She appeared to be around the same age as him. She sat at an anvil working on a pot of sorts, though whether she was adding or removing dents was only known to her. She looked up and appeared to be shocked at the sight of a young noble accompanied by 2 royal guards. "I need to speak to Karyst," he said.
"Oh, he's around the back."
With a quick whoosh of his cape, the young noble headed out, expecting to find a great blue dragonborn capable of tearing down the Red Clan's machinery, telling legends of honor to the hatchlings of the village, or even just smoking a pipe. The list of possibilities went on. The mound of dirt with a headstone and an old hammer stuck neatly and firmly into the top of it was not on the list. The noble went to the headstone and read, Karyst, Smith of Kings. No wife or children to carry on his name, but his stories are written in the stars he was fond of. After a moment of silence, whether for thought or for mourning, the young noble took out his journal, tore out a page, and started writing. Karyst, my father spoke highly of you. At least that's what Mom tells me anyways. Why else would we almost share a name? Your strange obsessions with handiwork and honor was sometimes what kept him going, even until the end. You probably know the Red Clan now holds the throne, and they hold it with malevolence. Words of the actions you and your father took are being spread by bards throughout Ordan. Whispers of revolution are starting to spread alongside them with the trunk of Yggdrasil. Am I doing metaphors right? I'm told those were what you liked to write with. There's so much to talk about. I would have loved to talk with you. Mom would probably want to catch up, but if it was discovered that she knew you, I don't know what the Red King would do. I know you're probably up in Asgard, forging alongside the dwarves of legend, but could you tell Dad I said hi? Mom too, she still mourns. Signed, Karyst. Wedlock fourth heir to the throne. The young noble, Karyst, dug a small hole in the grave and buried the note. He went to see the young smith inside still working on the pot. He put his hands on the pot and spoke. Thank you for letting me see him. I'm sorry for your loss. She looked up and tried to say something before he left, but he was gone before she could say anything. She turned back to her pot, but when she looked down, it was in pristine condition.
Young Karyst was at the forested edge of a large field, filled with hatchlings old and young, performing a variety of challenges that almost looked silly, even with context. It was time for the annual apprenticeship trials, a series of tests, both physical and mental, performed by hatchlings to be seen from onlookers all around, some for sport, some for judgment. Many up-and-coming trade masters traveled from around the kingdom to the local villages in search of a hatchling to teach their craft too. For the masters, it was a chance to prove that they truly knew their craft and weren't simply lucky. For the parents and denizens of the village, there was much at stake. A selection by a master from a richer village or even a city would mean pride and possible increased trade with the village under the belief that something was being done right with growing nature. Whether by gods or by people was only determined by the rare soothsayer. A selection by master from a poorer village or a clan was simply seen as pity. A hatchling born the same color as the village was also seen as good luck. Alright, that'll do, the middle one. Karyst groggily looked up. He hadn't slept in. How long had it been? He had been able to watch Yggdrasil move beyond the horizon of Yggdrasil due to the plates in his spine emerging from his back and his tail's increasing girth, making it impossible to sleep on his back as he liked. The elders jokingly referred to this phase of a hatchling's life as the night shift, due to a lot of them being up all night since they had to figure out different ways to sleep with their growing bodies and risk skin regularly shedding as a side effect. Karyst of the Blue Village, please step forth. Within seconds, everything had stopped. The denizens of the Blue Village, travelers from around the country, and even the hatchlings actively being judged stopped and turned. Karyst didn't notice he didn't have the mental energy. He stopped his task of repeatedly punching a tree and trudged over to the game master as a silvery dragonborn with a thin black beard called him over. The tree itself was roughly 1 meter thick at the trunk and had been used in these trials so many times it had acquired a handful of angles, almost making it geometric.
Well, what does punching a tree even have to do with anything?
Shoulders back, tails down.
No, Dad, you're embarrassing me. Wait, why can I hear him?
Karyst then realized that no one else was talking, which was highly unusual. He assumed the position as he faced the game master. The elder red dragonborn towered over most of the spectators, but Karyst barely even came to his chest. The game master stepped aside. Is this the one? Indeed. But a first test, game master, if you would. Please hold this in front of young Karyst here. The silvery dragonborn known as Odron handed the game master a thick plate of metal. While it may be considered heavy to the peoples of Valkosia, the continent of mammals, he was able to hold it like a door on hinges without issue. Young Karyst, I would like you to do exactly what you were doing just to that poor tree over there, to this metal. Due to his fatigue and exhaustion, Karyst started off very slow while he gathered energy within himself. Faster! Karyst picked up speed as a couple spectators made a joke of how he sounded like the Red Clan's newest locomotion machine. Eventually, prospective onlookers as well as other master smiths noticed that the metal started to glow. hatchling too young to be participating in the trials looked up and started to see clouds gather slowly overhead. Suddenly, a loud could be heard as Odron grabbed the far end of the metal piece and shoved it towards Karyst, who tumbled backwards with a broken arm. Medics on standby ran over and began putting his arm in a bandage and a splint. There was some commotion in the crowd of villagers and onlookers, not seeking an apprentice, but Karyst didn't notice as he tried to maintain his composure.
Yeah, you go punch that metal salad tosser. Nice.
Yelled a much older red hatchling. Why does that one call you salad tosser?
Well, my parents are cooks, and I can't use the pants because it hurts me and them, so all I could do is make salads and clay bowls. He said his friends in Falcosia said it was an insult.
Oh, well, worry not, for the bears ridden into battle do not concern themselves with the affairs of the flies. As he motioned toward the metal plate that now had a hole punched through it. As Odron helped Karyst up, the older hatchling spit a wad of fire at him. Before it even reached the peak of its journey, the Game Master breathed a beam of fire so consistent and pure it had a laminar flow and shot it down. The hatchling tried and failed to look unimpressed. Game Master, have this blue one's belongings packed. I want him on his way to my smithy in the capital by dawn. It was now Karyst's turn to be speechless. Some thunder could be heard in the distance.
Wasn't it sunny earlier?
Fire. The roaring winds feeding the insatiable void to fuel its consumption. Karyst looked around. Despite very few structures or anything to sustain a fire, it was all around him. As he turned, a wall of flames in front of him parted. He could see the farmer, Valka, tilling the soil, ready to plant seeds for the next year, completely oblivious to everything outside of her farm burning. Behind her, a large cubic figure, a machine taller than any castle that even the greatest architects could hope to make, loomed overhead. A rake as wide as it was, arms connecting to either side of its massive form raised overhead as the creaking of metal could be heard. Instantly, it came down, stretching, just beyond where Valka was peacefully working, burying the teeth of the rake deeper than any coffin could into the farmland. More creaking and moaning was heard as a large rake was drawn back to its master, scooping all of the dirt and the unaware Valka up, leaving the stone that held the farmland above exposed and mangled. A large mouth opened up at the base of the machine, and inside roared a flame so hot the most ancient and powerful dragons were put to shame. So bright that the flames that licked his face now cast shadows. After the rake scooped up all the dirt with Valka and any other unfortunate souls into its mouth, a loud boom could be heard as the mouth closed. Dark. Cold. The fire everywhere was extinguished, but the smoke still lingered. Two large glowing eyes opened up atop the machine, giving the area a low level of light. His attention was turned to the rapid coming from the former farmland. He saw a long metal arm coming from the machine, hovering above where the teeth carved into the stone below. It dropped 1, 2, 3 seeds in the rubble where they would never grow. Then it retracted. Off in the distance, someone could be heard barking orders. Karyst moved towards it and rapidly arrived at a bright light illuminating the site of a great contraption, gears interconnecting and spinning with one another, bands and strings crisscrossing and moving parts not connected by gears. A large shadowy figure could be seen yelling at a line of 7 workers ranging from elders to hatchlings, all tirelessly working to turn large wheels that were connected to the center of the contraption, giving life to the entire thing. He looked to the other end of the contraption where 2 wooden and metal arms worked. One was repeatedly hitting a warped and twisted sword on an anvil with a wooden hammer. The metal had gone cold long ago and was no longer malleable, but still the hammer worked, hitting a dent in the sword that was only getting bigger. The other arm had a hand at the end, moved slowly across a bunch of grapes. When it decided to rest, the hand slowly clasped around a single grape and pulled it free from the vine. Inch by inch, it moved to a small, elegant table where the Red King, now swollen like a drunkard's wineskin, sat with his mouth open in a large, gluttonous grin. As the arm neared the conclusion of its tedious journey, the hum of the contraption slowed to a stop. The Red King started screaming unintelligibly, pointing towards the line of workers, out of which one of the elders collapsed out of exhaustion. When the others kept working, now much harder, the shadowy figure angrily moved and grabbed the elder by the throat and lifted him off the ground. "Stop! That is enough!" Karyst yelled from the shadows where he stood. Instantly, the shadowy figure turned around. 2 emerald eyes glowed from the void. Karyst looked and saw the workers, the Red King, and even the elder being held by the throat were now looking directly at him. "Traitor! Coward! Weak! Treason!" They all started speaking. Whispers from all around, admonishing Karyst for the sins of his past. He tried to speak up, but the smoke was now stuffed in his throat. Words could not escape. "You will never be given a seat at the feast in Valhalla!" The words of a former friend lost long ago rang in his head. Karyst turned and did the only thing left that he could do and ran into the smoky abyss, arms and legs hitting the floor as he galloped away. Even after the voices stopped, he ran, out of breath and coughing from the smoke and sore from his hips. Not needing to be used like that in years, Karyst slowed down and stood up when suddenly he was lit by a glowing eye in the far distance. The owner of that eye, a metal beast, huffed as the triangle on top of its head breathed yet more smoke. It screamed. It began moving towards him. He could see on either side of its long body were wheels with metal arms and hands attached to each wheel, reaching to the next. The fingers went beyond the spokes, and through them, and pulled them like levers as the wheels spun forward and gradually sped up, screaming again. Despite being out of energy, Karyst turned and tried to run again, but something was wrong. His feet were moving along the ground, but he wasn't moving with it. Dropping back down to all fours, he turned his head and saw the metal horror start to rapidly approach, its hands working rapidly to pull its body along as it huffed, much faster now. In a fruitless effort, Karyst tried galloping even further and faster, but he saw the monster growing as it neared. The triangular mandibles in front of it opened with a vertical mouth, filled with an endless fire, as it screamed once again. The Karyst could feel the heat as it drew near. The metal beast lurched up with its mouth opened up like a snake ready to strike when Karyst hit the stone wall of his small bedroom with his nose and fell backwards off of the cot. Though his body was once one that conducted, wielded, and breathed electricity, this morning he breathed water alongside last night's stew. It was late in the morning and the sun was streaming directly onto his cot. Behind him, in the rundown smithy he now called a home, a pale green hatchling walked in.
It's ready yet? Yfilgard is halfway down the horizon, and we still need to plant crops for the year.
Just a moment. You're Valka's hatchling, correct?
Fearguard had set long ago. Summer was in full swing. The late afternoon royal marketplace was bustling with exotic fruit vendors, jewelers, and a couple vendors from the mammalian continent Valkosia, like the dwarves bringing their precious and or polished stones, an elf bringing seasonal plants native to her region that wouldn't last the winter in the highlands, and a human bringing furs for clothing and furniture. The smithy was in the corner due to its hot and odorous nature, but the dwarves didn't really mind. A dragonborn noble was busy being swindled over an egg-shaped opal from the two dwarves when suddenly he felt a swift chill. It was difficult for him to move as one side of his body lost energy, attempting to balance its internal temperature. "Well, if it wasn't Master Oldron, how's your apprentice coming along?" exclaimed the dwarf as a shimmering silver dragonborn stormed past the stall, thin beard flowing behind his shoulder, headed to the smithy. There was a cold silence among the part of the stall and the marketplace until Odron entered. No one noticed that there was yelling coming from inside the smithy. With barely a break in the noise, the sound shifted to metal being hit and tools falling to the floor as if everything was being knocked around. After roughly a minute, the onlookers saw Odron dragging a beaten and bloodied red dragonborn in a relatively new guard's uniform out by the tail. With a heavy grunt, he threw the red dragonborn to the middle of the market square beneath the two rowan trees. "And stay out!" Odron exclaimed, throwing the now clearly drunken and disgraced guard's uniform insignia at his feet. The guard slurred some sentences, including the words farm boy, but nothing else was understood. Odron walked back inside. His apprentice Karyst stood there, dark bruises forming on his forearms. He'd held a sword with the tip and a part of the edge by the hilt broken off. Karyst had been studying under him for several years now, but some mistakes were still to be expected. Anything could have caused it, from bad coals to bad steel to just rushing the project through. Regardless, the guard just decided to deal with the mistake in person. Odron started picking up the tool racks and unfinished projects from the ground. Karyst slowly and silently left the sword at the edge of the forge, grabbed his usual chair, and then headed out the back. Odron knew better than to confront him right now. Neither of them were strangers to disgruntled customers, but Odron grew up in the city where aggression was to be expected. Karyst was more soft-spoken due to both his stutter that was now decreasing and growing up in a farm town, and therefore didn't have the mental tools to deal with being berated by someone, especially if that someone was in a position of power. Karyst sat outside in the back, trying to occupy his mind while every course of action and mistake that could have been made with that sword raced through his head, trying to find a resolution. He looked up and saw the astral trunk of Yggdrasil looming far overhead, branches sprawling to the realms and beyond. What stories would be told today? What mischief is Loki up to? Did he steal Mjolnir and give it to an eagle? Did Odin eavesdrop on Radataskar's secrets to Nihog? The stories rarely changed, but that didn't make them any less of a delight to the blue, statically charged Dragonborn. "We hereby charge the disgraced Master Smith Odron with sedition against the Red Clan and treason against the Celestial King." The stars had shone bright overhead. It was mostly a quiet night. One could hear the sounds of crickets, a river running, and the dozens of torches shedding light upon the guillotine. A shackled Karyst watched from between two red guards, waiting for the ceremony to proceed. The guards from the Red Clan weren't as big as he was, but for what they lacked in volume, they made up for in training fivefold. The day before, the smithy was raided by the foreign guardsmen. They easily subdued the white elder Odron, but Karyst did not resist. He had been running and hiding from his problems all of his life, and now with his life's seconds ticking down, he didn't. The sabotage they performed a couple days prior was one that Karyst felt right, and one day he hoped the people in the Clan of Gold would see that. Besides, it was an honorable thing to go down for a cause. "Painter, look at him!" The people of the city sneered and whispered as the smithing duo was led to the courtyard. "Weak!" The guards didn't miss their chance at psychological humiliation either. After it took 3 to bring down Karyst, they mocked him endlessly because they realized he would not fight back. Karyst looked on towards Odron, who was now behind the chopping block. Even though they both mourned the previous night, it was still very difficult to watch his mentor and friend on trial for an ultimate execution. At first, Karyst didn't want to watch. He looked up to the stars and where he hoped he would go. Somewhere upon the branches of Yggdrasil above lay Asgard, where those deemed worthy went to paradise, and where he may work within the smiths of great. Karyst almost missed it, but there was a shooting star. Slow and faint, it could easily be missed, but Karyst knew the skies well. He followed the direction it was headed, and as his head and eyes moved downward, the comet seemed to speed up. His head moved down and down until his eyes were back within the city walls. More specifically, they were looking at Odron, who was now resting on the chopping block. Their eyes met, and all things seemed to go quiet. Karyst watched from his peripheral vision as the two large winged executioners started lowering their axes ready to kill the one that had made them. Suddenly, Karyst heard one thing. Run! Odron gave one final word before his last chilling breath when shooting towards Karyst. Given his time as a smith, Odron knew which metals became brittle when chilled to extreme temperatures. The gauntlets that bound him were resistant to cold, but Karyst's weren't. Instantly, Karyst felt the early stages of frostbite on his arms and hands, as well as his left leg and tail, but he knew what needed to be done. With the last order given to him by his lifelong friend ringing in his head, he felt a surge of willpower and conviction. Fighting through the pain, he rapidly brought his arms up and under towards his chest as his muscles strained against the now frozen steel gauntlets. They snapped. The guards surrounding him attempted to subdue him, but due to a mixture of factors, including a massive difference in size, the element of surprise, and 100,000 volts in the face, they were unable to do much. The audience got out of the way of the moving taser since they were not combatants, but that didn't stop them from reacting. Turn to the crown! You coward, get back here! Karyst tried to shut them out as he went into full gallop through the city. At the gate, he saw his friend Brynjar standing at the guard post. She had no doubt been informed of the execution today. Move! Karyst exclaimed. Brynjar moved to stop him.
Are you leaving? During your own trial?
Karyst slowed down and met Brynjar face to face.
Do you even realize how dishonorable this is? What do you think awaits you in the afterlife? Odin does not accept cowards.
Karyst attempted to move further, but was halted once more.
No, I will not let you throw away your life.
I was given my final order. Do not make me hurt you. A moment passed before Karyst used the last of his respiratory energy to send Brynjar to the ground. I am sorry, old friend, but I must go. Karyst was several hundred feet out the gate when he heard the phrase that would stick with him even after he died.
You will never be given a seat at the feast in Valhalla!
From there, Karyst ran. Without a destination or an end goal in mind, he followed the branches of Yggdrasil in the sky, praying that he had not angered even the Valkyries.
Karyst stood silently as the last speech at his father's funeral came to a close. He didn't have a speech. Why would he? The Dragonborn traditions had him leave home at an early age, and as Karyst recently found out, his father had turned to drinking and other means of getting a quick high several years after Karyst left for the capital. Karyst, Odron asked. Karyst, please at least acknowledge that you heard me. Karyst looked towards his aging mentor. His face wasn't sad, but the couple gears that were metaphorically in his head were turning. Do you think Valhalla awaits your father? Karyst turned back to the grave. The answer to this question seemed obvious, but Odron was known for asking questions like this for a purpose. He turned back. I see you've learned why I ask these questions. Valhalla is for those who have lost their lives in battle. But just because this part of the country isn't under invasion does not mean that there were no battles to be had. Your father was battling his own mind. The way he saw best to do that was to poison himself to steal the joys of tomorrow for today. You almost never know what battles someone is fighting alone, and until you become a Valkyrie who can wield that judgment, you must reserve your assumptions. Karyst sat down and let that sink in for a bit before asking, how much fighting is necessary to be accepted into Valhalla? You know, that is above my pay grade. Until Odin himself wants to come down to give us a rule book, we can only act on what we believe is right. That does not mean, however, that you should seek out battles needlessly. A constantly fighting spirit will wear itself out, and when the time comes and it needs to fight, it will have nothing left. That last line rung out in Karyst's head. This time, though, it was out of irony. He had just died again, and by some manipulation of fate was brought back to where he lay. The meaning of life was starting to blur a bit. His only counsel was a purple alien, not even of this world, while sitting in the back of a cart pulled by a mechanical beast that the Red Clan could only dream of.
Not all of us will be granted to go where we wish.
to see the end and be accepted. But just because you haven't arrived there doesn't mean it's not real. Your own faith and your own beliefs are what matters. Just because you haven't seen it doesn't mean it won't appear.
He knew the words of the former amnesiac were true, but it would take a while to sink in. Lavari spoke of a grander scheme than Karyst could comprehend, one where the gods of his world and even this one were merely pawns to entities that sought out strange goals that manipulated those that can control time itself.
The first one is kind of like, haha, fool. I dodged, but oh no, the heat from this blast is affecting me.
This is
How
like
dare you?
porn level act. Oh no, step bro! I've been hit by a fireball.
Yeah, well.
I see that because you're normally a very good narrator, and oh no, how inconvenient! I, a snowman, have been hit by a fireball.
I
Whatever,
don't know
will
if
I
I'm
do?
leaving this in or not.
God, I hope not.
I'll have to wait till I sober up and then decide.
Oh shit. Okay.